When a giant leaves the world above, its final journey may create life where almost nothing else can survive. For hours, the carcass falls through water that has never known daylight. Below, an empty plain waits for an event that may happen only once in centuries. The impact is brief, but the consequences will shape this place for decades. At first, the fallen giant rests alone, while its presence begins to change the silent seabed around it. In darkness, scent becomes a message capable of traveling far beyond the reach of sight. A distant deep-sea traveler passes quietly beside the fallen giant. Another deep-sea wanderer passes quietly above the fallen giant, resting on the ocean floor. Small travelers also follow chemical signals moving across the abyssal plain. A slender fish follows the outer shape of the skeleton before returning to open water. The chemical change around the giant attracts armored animals from the surrounding plain. Minute particles carried by the current can guide a small scavenger across great distances. As the skeleton becomes visible, new edges and sheltered spaces appear above the flat seabed. A single bone changes the current and creates a protected resting place. The rib has already become shelter, where drifting food collects in slower water. The broad body creates quiet current shadows used by smaller deep-sea animals. The open ribs create a corridor through an otherwise featureless landscape. Passing fish investigate the changing landscape without approaching the silent giant. The vertebrae now provide natural shelter in a landscape that once offered nowhere to hide. As the skeleton becomes exposed, the largest travelers pass without stopping. As the feast diminishes, smaller filter feeders inherit the spaces abandoned by giants. At microscopic scale, the whale remains an immense continent of food. Nutrients carried into the sediment support animals that live entirely beneath its surface. The nutrient-rich sediment becomes a new feeding ground, spreading outward from the skeleton. Beneath the ribs, a brittle star gathers microscopic nourishment across the sediment. The whale is no longer only above the seabed, its nutrients have become part of the ground. A hidden feeder can exploit the whale fall without exposing its vulnerable body. Below the surface, the whale's energy continues moving through animals almost never seen. As the skeleton becomes exposed, microbial life begins covering its mineral surface. Moving only millimeters at a time, the nudibranch grazes the microbial film covering the exposed bone. The skeleton feeds a second generation of animals long after the first feast has ended. Protected between the ribs, microbial films support slow-moving grazers. The whale fall attracts travelers that carry their own protection across the exposed plain. Even the thinnest cracks in the bone hold enough material to reward a patient search. Tube-building worms create permanent homes in sediment enriched by the fallen giant. Bacteria convert the whale's buried fats into food for an entirely new community. Specialized worms help recycle nutrients stored within old bone, continuing the transformation of the skeleton. Around every bone-eating worm, smaller grazers harvest the community growing at the surface. Chemical energy from the whale now supports animals without depending on sunlight. The enriched mud becomes a chemical oasis for clams, powered by microscopic partners. The whale's buried oils continue feeding life through chemical reactions beneath the seabed. Microbes form a pale frontier where chemical energy rises from the buried remains. At the smallest scale, bacteria perform the final transformation from death into usable energy. The enriched plain now supports fragile giants made from a single living cell. The skeleton has become elevated habitat in a landscape otherwise almost completely flat. Hard bone allows filter feeders to rise above the mud and reach moving water. Years after the fall, the ribs support animals that feed not on the whale, but on the passing sea. The final stage transforms the skeleton from food source into permanent reef. A new generation finds protection inside the body of an animal that died long before it was born. The giant has vanished, yet its final journey continues through every life now rooted in its bones.
At the bottom of the ocean lies another sea, one so dense that most animals cannot enter and survive.
The boundary behaves like a shoreline, yet below it begins a layer almost empty of oxygen. Life gathers at the edge, feeding on chemical energy rising from below. Even predators avoid the lake itself, patrolling only the narrow ring of life around it. The seafloor itself is unstable, and survival depends on sensing changes before they become dangerous. Beyond the brine, another chemical world begins, where gas escapes through fractured sediment. Methane rises in silent columns, feeding life through chemistry rather than sunlight. These bacterial fields convert invisible gas into energy that larger animals can use. A dense bed of mussels marks the place where gas and seawater meet. The shell bed creates shelter, current breaks, and new feeding opportunities for passing fish. What appears to be ice is methane locked into crystal by cold and enormous pressure. When the hydrate breaks down, stored gas escapes and reshapes the community around it. Over time, chemical reactions turn soft mud into hard carbonate towers. Hard ground creates corridors in a region otherwise dominated by soft sediment. Some fish use these towers as landmarks in a world with almost no visual reference.
Cold mud volcanoes erupt without fire, driven by gas and fluid rising from beneath the seafloor.
Fresh deposits quickly become feeding grounds for animals adapted to unstable terrain. What appears to be ice is methane locked into crystal by cold and enormous pressure. The clams survive through bacteria inside their bodies, converting chemicals into food. Where shells accumulate, the bottom becomes more complex and more attractive to larger fish. Even weak currents matter when energy must be conserved over every meter. Long-bodied fish follow chemical corridors that wind through the seep field. Clear fluid can be as chemically powerful as any visible plume. The chemical trail now leads from cold seeps toward a hotter world built from volcanic rock. The first warm fissures appear before the great chimneys come into view. Life survives not in the hottest water, but along the narrow boundary beside it. Camouflage remains useful even where chemistry, not sunlight, shapes the landscape. The field is a maze of invisible temperature gradients. Beyond the hottest zone, predators wait where drifting material brings smaller life. A few degrees of temperature can define the edge of a safe habitat. Specialized eyes help the green eyes search the darkness above the mineral towers. Here, at the deep-sea seep, the tripod fish patiently waits, its 3 specialized fins keeping it clear of the toxic sediment below. Vent fish live along a thermal boundary, only centimeters wide. Shelter from the strongest flow allows fish to conserve energy beside the vent. Its survival depends on remaining inside a moving ribbon of habitable temperature. Mineral structures become natural caves in a landscape shaped by heat. The chimney base supports a dense community where chemical energy is most accessible.
Even an octopus must stay close to cooler water while exploring the heated rock.
The yeti crab farms bacteria directly on its own body. Its ama incorporates minerals from the vent itself. A few centimeters of rock can separate safe feeding ground from lethal heat. At the chimney base, every fragment of rock becomes part of a living maze. This shrimp reads heat and chemistry through organs adapted to the vent boundary. Smaller shrimp exploit the quieter spaces beneath the main flow.
The worm survives by keeping one end near extreme heat and the other in colder seawater.
Without a mouth or digestive system, the tube worm depends entirely on bacteria living inside its body. Larger fish patrol the outer zone, where temperature and chemistry become more stable. The outer slopes connect the vent oasis with the wider deep ocean.
Even far from the chimney, traces of the vent continue shaping animal movement.
At the edge of the oasis, the vental's influence fades particle by particle.
Cold seeps and hot vents appear different, yet both build life from chemicals hidden beneath the seabed.
Here, life does not wait for sunlight. It rises from the chemistry of the earth itself. In complete darkness, animals have built a city from glass. Every surface becomes valuable when solid ground is rare. Here, even a sponge has become a patient predator. Its unusual shape turns open water into a feeding surface. The city is shaped by currents no eye can see. Soft coral creates height, shelter, and feeding space above the barren floor. A single coral can divide the current into dozens of sheltered pathways. Against the cliff, black coral forms a living wall within the darkness. The ridge concentrates passing food, allowing a coral forest to rise above stone. At the cliff's edge, coral reaches outward into a current rich with drifting life. Beyond the hard reef, life rises directly from the mud. Height gives this coral access to food carried above the slower boundary water. Inside a crack no larger than a hand, one coral survives alone. The city's smallest builders create rooms measured in fractions of a millimeter. Unlike most residents, the feather star can leave one tower and cross to another. At night without nightfall, the basket star unfolds its living net.
A rigid stalk lifts the crinoid above the crowded reef and into faster water.
The reef responds to every change in water long before the current becomes visible. An ancient fish moves through the coral city with a design older than most life on land. Along the reef's edge, the frilled shark follows pathways hidden in darkness.
A hidden mechanism allows the goblin shark to reach beyond its own head.
Some visitors move so slowly that the city may change before they return. The reef's narrow corridors reward precise movement over speed. The coral forest provides shelter even for animals that never remain long. Protective scales allow the gulper shark to cross rough terrain without injury. Its strange shape is built for a world where maneuvering matters more than speed. Beneath the coral, the cat shark disappears into a pattern of shadow and stone. The pale reef gives this nearly invisible shark a maze of concealed roots. Large fish use the coral mound as both landmark and shelter from stronger water. Cold water carries oxygen through the city and supports powerful roaming fish. The coral arch becomes a doorway through a city without streets. A sponge tower creates calm water where a fish can rest without leaving the current. Above the city, open water travelers follow the shape of the reef below. Tall corals transform empty water into a three-dimensional forest. Caves beneath the coral offer protection to fish too large for the branches above. The city ends abruptly, and camouflage takes over where shelter disappears. Between coral islands, the flounder turns loose shell into concealment. Stillness allows the goosefish to turn one passing opportunity into a meal. The cliff is filled with hidden rooms that open directly into the current. Even in darkness, coral ridges guide fish through the landscape. The canopy provides cover without closing the path through the reef. From above, the sponge plain resembles a landscape shaped by silent towers. Warm mussel allows the opa to travel through colder water beyond the reef. A narrow body allows the gemfish to follow the cliff's most confined routes. The narrow saddle concentrates water, forcing every traveler to spend energy carefully. At the base of the reef, heavy-bodied fish use channels carved by water and stone. The chimera crosses the ravine with movements closer to flight than swimming. Some residents cross the city floor by walking rather than swimming. The crab carries pieces of the city upon its own body. Without sunlight, hands, or machines, living bodies have built one of the oldest cities on Earth.
When darkness rises toward the surface, the hunters rise with it. Each night, the viperfish leaves the depths to follow food rising above.
Its red light reveals prey that cannot see the color approaching. The dragonfish survives by becoming almost indistinguishable from the water around it. A delicate lure hangs beneath a predator built almost entirely from shadow.
In complete darkness, touch and chemistry may matter more than sight.
Its fearsome teeth belong to a fish smaller than the darkness makes it appear.
A single rare meal must sometimes sustain the swallower for weeks.
One of Earth's most abundant vertebrates lives almost entirely beyond human sight. Lanternfish carry their own pattern of light into the nightly migration. The migration is not a single column, but millions of separate journeys. Light can conceal as effectively as darkness, when every flash has a purpose. A brief burst of speed is enough when prey gathers in a narrow layer. A mirrored body erases the fish's outline when viewed from below. Its body is shaped not for speed, but for invisibility.
A difference of only a few degrees can decide whether the fish is seen.
Its eyes turn upward because almost every opportunity arrives from above. Inside its transparent head, the barrel eye can rotate its vision toward opportunity.
In open darkness, a narrow field of vision is aimed toward the only direction that matters. The predator does not chase the migration. It waits for the migration to come closer.
Large eyes gather the few photons scattered through a nearly lightless world.
Built like a blade, the lancetfish travels between feeding layers with little wasted motion. Color still has meaning here, even where red becomes almost invisible.
Color still has meaning here, even where red becomes almost invisible.
Dark skin prevents even the faintest reflection from exposing the fish.
A mouth larger than its body allows the eel to collect food without a long chase.
The gulper turns the water itself into a net. A body like a thread allows the snipe eel to wait almost motionless beneath its prey.
The eel follows invisible rivers flowing through the open ocean. A cloud of living light can confuse danger long enough for the fish to escape.
Small squid join the migration by hiding among the particles that surround them. Broad scales protect a small traveler as it follows the nightly ascent of food.
A long, flexible body crosses invisible currents with almost no wasted motion.
Two different eyes allow one squid to watch two different worlds at once.
Soft-bodied travelers rise quietly among the drifting life of the migration.
Each photophore can be controlled independently, turning the body into a shifting signal. A short flash may attract a mate, confuse a predator, or hide the squid's silhouette. Powerful arms remain folded until the squid reaches the narrow layer where food is concentrated.
Small crustaceans power the migration from below, swimming upward toward richer water. Even the smallest fish climb hundreds of meters when the ocean's food begins to rise.
A red stomach hides the glow of prey already swallowed.
The colors are not light produced by the animal, but light broken apart by moving cilia.
Its two soft lobes gather drifting plankton as the nightly migration passes through the darkness. What appears to be one animal is an entire colony traveling as a single body. Each part performs a different task, yet none can survive alone.
Even fragile colonies cross hundreds of vertical meters during the nightly ascent.
The crown jelly rises with the migration while spending almost no energy. Its narrow bell is shaped for a slow vertical journey through dense water.
A body thinner than fabric becomes a living trap, suspended in darkness.
Before daylight reaches the upper ocean, the hidden migration turns back toward the abyss.
In the deepest darkness, finding a mate can become a permanent union.
A male may search an entire ocean for the chemical signature of a single female. Large fins help the female hold position while a potential mate approaches. The smaller male must recognize the female before the darkness separates them again. A single slender lure extends from the head, while chemical signals guide the smaller male through the darkness. A delicate sensory bauble carries faint signals through the darkness as a potential mate approaches. Even the strangest predator must solve the same problem of finding a mate. Courtship becomes a slow dance performed without landmarks or daylight. The male relies on scent and touch long before he can recognize the female's shape. In the deep, even a second lure may help separate one species from another. Some deep-sea fish release their future into the current and never see it again.
The eggs begin a journey controlled entirely by water.
A brief meeting is enough to begin a life cycle lasting far longer than the encounter. Timing matters when the current may separate two fish within seconds. Courtship allows each fish to confirm species, size, and readiness before spawning. Growth in the deep may replace one body design with another across many weeks. The juvenile form may look so different that it was once mistaken for another species.
A tiny drifting juvenile must feed while the current decides where it will grow. Even near the seafloor, reproduction depends on water carrying cells beyond the parent. A simple spiral may be the only courtship display visible in an empty water column.
The longest bony fish release their eggs into a sea large enough to hide every beginning.
A narrow temperature layer becomes a meeting place in the open ocean.
Before spawning, the pair must remain close in a world constantly pulling them apart.
Most eggs will vanish into the dark, but a few may continue the lineage. For years, the mother may guard her eggs without leaving to feed. One protected egg may carry more energy than hundreds released into open water. Without functional eyes, courtship depends on touch, water movement, and chemical recognition. Bioluminescent suckers may turn courtship into a private language of light. Carrying the clutch keeps each developing embryo close to moving, oxygen-rich water.
Even transparent animals must reveal enough of themselves to recognize a mate.
A drifting mother turns her own body into shelter for the next generation. The mother protects each egg against sediment, predators, and stagnant water. She carries thousands of developing eggs beneath her arms, protecting them through the long darkness.
Even on the empty abyssal plain, a brief alignment in the current can be enough to begin a new generation.
For some deep-sea mothers, the next generation travels everywhere beneath the body itself. Beneath his body, a father carries the developing eggs on appendages built specifically for protection. A single protective case gives the developing skate months of shelter on the deep ocean floor. Even animals rooted in place can send their future into the water around them.
A brief rise into the current allows even the softest drifter to release life into the sea. Protection can be as simple as carrying the unseen brood beneath a living shield. A fragile filter house becomes both feeding machine and final stage of reproduction.
Some gelatinous animals create new generations by budding copies from a single body. One solitary salp can produce the beginning of an entire drifting chain. Two small predators exchange reproductive cells while suspended in open water.
A floating ribbon keeps hundreds of tiny embryos separated in moving water.
Once released, the delicate egg string drifts freely, carrying a new generation away from its mother. Rows of delicate paddles carry this transparent drifter through the darkness, while its offspring enter the current.
A reef begins when one polyp becomes two.
Beneath overlapping brood plates, the next generation develops unseen and protected from the open abyss. Most beginnings will disappear into the darkness, but a few will return as the next hidden generation.
Even the deepest seafloor is not still. Beneath this animal, the planet has begun to move.
A single fracture exposes sediment that may have remained buried for thousands of years. Gravity turns the broken slope into an underwater avalanche.
It cannot outrun the avalanche, but a few body lengths may carry it beyond the strongest flow.
The moving cloud behaves like a river, confined by the walls of the trench.
Behind one rock, the force of the current falls enough for a fragile fish to survive.
A body small enough to enter a crack can survive forces that reshape the entire valley. A single falling stone drives water and sediment outward, creating new shelter while burying the habitat beneath it. Loose sediment can bury a fish, but its soft body and steady fins can guide it back into open water.
Even inside the moving cloud, a small swimmer can search for one stable surface.
Different particles travel different distances, sorting the seafloor by weight. The safest path lies only centimeters above the densest part of the flow. Large eyes remain useful even when disturbance reduces visibility to almost nothing. A fresh deposit brings buried organic material back within reach.
As the current weakens, a new seafloor begins to form. Some seafloor animals can briefly leave the mud when the current offers a safer path.
The new rock becomes food trap, refuge, and lookout within hours of the collapse. Aftershocks continue to alter the safe routes across the basin.
The channel now guides both water and animals through the transformed landscape.
Erosion can uncover stable ground where an ambush fish can wait. The disturbance exposes food, but the unstable slope makes every approach uncertain. The moving mud has carved a staircase across the trench floor. A collapse can destroy one shelter and create another only meters away. The debris fan opens a new route across terrain that was once smooth and empty. An irregular fragment of the broken slope divides the current, leaving a narrow refuge behind it.
Scouring removes soft mud and leave behind pockets of stronger ground.
This fish depends on senses other than ordinary vision to cross the new terrain.
In the deepest basin, the disturbance has erased nearly every older feature.
Fresh fractures release water and chemicals trapped beneath the trench floor. Broken sediment creates a temporary maze where no hard reef existed before. In the new corridor, patience is safer than speed. Erosion exposes scattered traces of organic material once sealed within the slope. Temporary shelters may last only until the next fragment falls. Behind every obstacle, the current deposits a small concentration of food.
When the avalanche ends, the deepest residents return to a landscape they no longer recognize.
The first deposit feeders begin processing the untouched surface.
Each feeding trail begins the slow mixing of the new deposit. A brief swim allows the animal to cross terrain too unstable to crawl. The new mud is gradually transformed by bodies feeding one mouthful at a time. Long supports keep the animal above the softest layer of newly deposited mud. From one small central disc, 11 slender arms rise into the current above the recovering mud. Even a small stone can become elevated habitat above the sediment. Burial protects the star while allowing it to feed within the new layer. Across the fresh ripples, hundreds of tiny tube feet carry the sea star forward, only a few centimeters at a time. A soft body can conform to hard ground exposed by the disturbance. Within days, animal movement begins writing new patterns over those created by the avalanche. Open water predators also use the transformed seafloor as a guide through darkness. The new wall creates vertical habitat where only a smooth slope existed before.
Even drifting animals enter the basin before the sediment has completely settled. The avalanche has ended, but every new ridge, crack, and stone has begun another chapter of life. An earthquake fractured the slope, an avalanche reshaped the basin, and life has already begun adapting to every new ridge, shelter, and current. Thank you for joining this journey into the deepest ocean. Subscribe to the channel and return with us for the next hidden chapter beneath the sea.